Welcome, Robert Bronk, to the ORA. Thank you so much for coming today. Rob, you're also on our advisory board, and we're glad to have you here today. Thank you so much for coming. Why don't you give us a little chat and tell us about yourself?
Yeah, well, thanks, Mark and Joe. I really appreciate being here and getting the opportunity to talk a little bit about the industry. My background is, for 6 years, I was the executive director at the Finishing Trades Institute, and that facility was the official training delivery agent for the glazier trade as well as the commercial and industrial painters. And we also did health and safety training across the province. We had 3 campuses, so I got a lot of experience working with apprenticeship and training through that position. And the last 6 years, up until recently, I was the CEO of the Ontario Construction Secretariat. Now, that organization is jointly run by Labor and Management. We had 14 board members representing 25 different trades, so I got a lot of experience breadth-wise and depth-wise with all the different trades in the industry. So I have quite extensive background with respect to workforce development as well as how different organizations operate labor and management.
Rob, if you don't mind, I am very curious. Do you remember what the trade was, what the skilled trades were when you first began and how that has changed till today? Would you like to, just give us a little bit about that?
It has dramatically changed when I first started. Right now, I would have to say, speaking right now, not before, the provincial government has really, really invested a lot of not just money, but administrative support for not only training apprentices, promoting the trades, but also for capital expenditures. They've really, really done a great job in that respect. They're trying to remove the stigma behind apprenticeship training, and I see a huge differential. Just even during the pandemic years, there was a lot of effort being put into that. So there's been quite a positive, really beneficial change with respect to educators, influencers, and the government in terms of getting people aware of the trades and also promoting and backing it up with resources that were needed.
Rob, let's talk about the myths and facts about certain things in the trades. Like, let's talk about safety and training.
There's a big myth that I think we need to address is that union construction workers are not simply overpaid non-union workers. The industry puts a lot of money, time, and attention into the training. So typically speaking, Labor and Management have training trust funds where that money gets diverted to training centers, and it goes towards apprenticeship training, and it also goes towards health and safety training. It's a significant number. It's $145 million a year. From 2012 to 2019, there was over $325 million invested in capital expenditures. So the safety training comes out of the funds that go towards one pot, and one of the offshoots of that investment in training is a safer track record. The Ontario Construction Secretariat partnered with the Institute for Workplace Health. They did 2 peer-reviewed studies, one back in 2012, one back in 2020. They looked at every single record of union contractors' WSIB reports. It wasn't a sample size. They looked at every single record for the previous 5 years, and the initial result was 23% safer, union versus non-union. 8 years later, it increased to 31%. Now, these reports were peer-reviewed. They're rock solid. No one's been able to doubt them or question them. They are rock solid. And in fact, the whole industry has gotten safer, but the gap between union and non-union is increasing. Went from 23 to 31%. So safety, of course, is a huge issue when it comes to any occupation that you choose. And so I think parents and influencers, teachers, etc., can feel more confident that when they send their children, their young adults, and their recommend to kids in high school that a unionized construction job is going to be safer, and also you're going to have a professional career. That is a really important thing. There's a career path associated with apprenticeship, and it's the union sector that is invested in this. There's over 100 training centers, union training centers across the province, basically mirroring the population. There's no other network of this kind of training. There's a community college network, but it doesn't come close to this. And it's a loose federation. They do collaborate with each other. They talk, share best practices, but there's nothing in comparison. Nothing in comparison.
I want you to explain to us and our listeners the difference between public sector unions, construction unions, those different sectors, teachers unions. What's the big difference?
The big difference between public service unions and construction unions is that there's no competition in the public service union. There's no competitors. Where in the construction world, if for the sake of argument, I'm a worker and I tell my union I want a $30 an hour raise, and my union is successful in getting that in the collective agreement, the bottom line is his or her boss, if they have to pay $20 more an hour than the previous rate, they're not going to get any work. Contractors have to bid on projects, and bidding is you have to include the materials that you're using, the concrete, the steel rods, the paint, the piping. Then you have the wage component, then you have the profit margin component. If you're bidding against non-union contractors and your wage rate is $20 or $30 an hour more than theirs, guess who's going to get the work? It's not going to be the union contractor. So it has to be a partnership. And it is a partnership between the unions and management, and they have to work together to get that work. Whereas the public service unions, there's no competition. There's not a non-union teachers union representing a whole block of teachers. It's just that block of people, not just to pick on teachers. But the other publics, like the government workers unions, there's no competition. So that is the big difference. It's simply the taxpayers are going to pay whatever the increase, when it was negotiated, it's the taxpayers are going to pay the difference, and taxpayers have no say in the matter. Whereas contractors, the purchaser of the construction has something to say. So if it's in the private industry and there's a big developer that's going to open a project for bids, the lowest bid's going to get that work. So therefore, the union workforce has to understand that we're competing against non-union workforce, and so we have to make reasonable demands. So that is the big difference. And you will see most union workers are pro-business. They want their boss to be busy, because if they're busy, they're also going to get the hours and get the increases in salaries. So there's a big difference with respect to those types of unions.
Very interesting, Rob. So you've mentioned a couple of things here, especially the fact that unions in the construction trade are pro-business. Could you just share with the public how that system works? What is a sub? I mean, how does a construction site work when it comes to the job? When you say sub, what do you mean for the people out
question.
there?
Yeah. I'm going to differentiate between government work and private sector work. There are similar. So the purchaser of construction could be, for example, Infrastructure Ontario. It could be the government of Ontario. It could be the City of Toronto. They're the purchaser of construction. They will put out a bidding and tender process. So what typically happens in the private sector as well as the public sector is that the bidding process goes out. If it's a big enough project, the general contractor will make a bid on those projects. If it's significant. So a big general contractor could be Ellis Don, PCL, Pomerleau, like those kinds of companies. They're very large. They will be the primary contractor. Then they will work with different trade contractors, the painters, the plumbers, the laborers, the carpenters. And they will be employed by the trade contractors. The general contractor generally has very few employees in terms of workers on the site. They will not directly employ the electricians. They will not directly employ the plumbers. The trade contractors will employ those people.
So the trade contractors will for example, let's take downtown Toronto. One of the newest construction sites there is the Well.
Right.
That was Ellis Dunn.
Yes.
So Ellis Dunn would get the contract to build something like that.
Yes.
And then they then contract out to the
Yes.
various unions to do the work.
Yeah, to the various employers, the contractors. So they would. So for example, for electrical work, it would be IBW. For the plumbing, it would be United Associates.
Okay.
So each trade contractor, and you might have multiple trades, same union but different niche. So, for example, you might have some kind of special electrical. So one electrical contractor may just get the lighting. But if there was, for example, a hospital, if there was something special that needed to be done electrically, there might be another niche electrical contractor doing that work, depending on the size and scope of the project. So it's the general contractor may only have 40 workers on site, and there might be 1,000 men and women on the site. So they don't directly employ most of the workers on the job site. And that is also with the private sector where, for example, if you get a big company that does projects that are commercial, for example, like a shopping mall or something like that, the same kind of thing. The general contractor would be the first contact with them, and then the trades would be underneath them. And some of the really big projects, like the Metrolinx, they'll actually have two general contractors working together. Same thing happened with the Parliament buildings. You'll get two large general contractors working together.
Has it always been that way?
Years ago, millions and millions of dollars was a big. Now it's getting to the point where it's almost billions is the common. So projects are getting bigger in scope, way bigger. I mean, the new Ontario line and all these other, projects that the government has announced. They all start with a B now. It's billions, and whereas before they were smaller. So yes, there's still a lot of work out. Sometimes, to answer your first question, sometimes if a project is just maintenance or retrofitting, there may not be a general contractor. You might just, the property management might just have a direct relationship with the trade contractor. So if they just need to retrofit, say, their heating ventilation system, or they want to do new wiring or something, they'll just go directly to a bidding process with the trade contractors. So it depends on the scope of the project, how big it is. Is it new? Is it retrofitting? So there's different scenarios.
I'm a graduate of ORA here. I have an opportunity to now begin working. What are the advantages of me being unionized?
Being part of a union means that now everyone has a career path, union or non-union. But the career path of an apprentice has a lot of different stages. And the unions give support for each of those stages. So let's say, for the sake of argument, you start off, you're a pre-apprentice. You're green as grass. You've never had any kind of construction experience whatsoever. You get that kind of training. So part of that is life skills training, having to get up at 6:30 in the morning and go to work, which is a rude awakening to a lot of people, including my sons. But getting those life skills in place where, you're there 5 days a week, you're there at 7 a.m. in the morning, rain or shine, or whether the Raptors were in the playoffs last night or not, you're showing up consistently. And then moving from a pre-apprenticeship to an apprenticeship. That may involve some steps. You may need some educational upgrades because there's minimum requirements for some of the trades. Sometimes it's grade 10, sometimes grade 12, English, math, those kinds of things. So if you don't have those in that pre-apprenticeship stage, you get those educational updates. When you qualify, you sign what's called a registered training agreement. And that's with the province of Ontario. And now you're a registered apprentice. And so you're a level 1. And that means you're eligible for certain funding, your employer's eligible for certain funding, and also when you do go to school, typically in an apprenticeship, it takes 4 to 5 years. There's different levels, generally level 1, level 2, level 3. Generally speaking, there's an 8-week in-school training session. So when you have an RTA, that means when you do go to school for 8 weeks, you're eligible.
What is an RTA?
Registered training agreement.
Okay, fantastic.
So that means you're a registered apprentice. And that means that when you go to school for those 8 weeks, you're eligible to collect unemployment insurance or employment insurance now. And so then you go back. So when you leave your current employer, you go to school for 8 weeks. If your current employer doesn't take you back, you go back to the union hall, and the union hall finds you a job. They support you in that manner. And so there's 3 levels generally that you go to school over 4 to 5 years. There's training and supports along the way. So, for example, you finish level 1 and you struggle with a couple of things. There's training and supports to make sure that you don't get lost that when you're eligible for level 2, that you're caught up, you're up to speed, and you're going to succeed. And so that happens with level 2 and also level 3. Some of the unions have what's called a joint apprenticeship training committee. Now that's union and it's the union and its contractors, actual contractors. And their job is to monitor your progress. Because some contractors do only one thing. But the scope of work for your trade is quite extensive. So if you just work with one employer all the time, you're not going to get to use every tool in your toolbox. The whole point of an apprentice is that you get an experience with the whole scope of work. Each trade has a scope of work, different assignments, different tasks, and you want to be exposed to all of them. So in theory, the Joint Apprenticeship Training Committee, JTC, is supposed to monitor apprentices and make sure that they don't get caught into the old Henry Ford model of work where you just do one thing all the time. You have to be exposed. So you have that behind your back. And so that makes sure that your apprenticeship is wholesome and fulsome so that when you do finish, you've been exposed to all the different work. The other advantage is that if, for example, your current employer has a bit of a slow period, you might get laid off. You get sent back to the hall. The hall's job is to find you another job. And your apprenticeship doesn't end. If you sign a registered training agreement and the non-union sector, that individual contractor is your sponsor. And if he lays you off, you have to find another sponsor. But in the union sector, it's the union is your sponsor. So there's no interruption with your apprenticeship, with your registered training agreement. And so when you've got enough experience, 4 or 5 years, you finish level 3, then you have to write an exam, and it's called a Certificate of Qualification. That exam makes you, if you pass it, you become a journeyman, journey person. You have to pass it. But it's an exam that's province-wide. It's actually countrywide. The Red Seal program, this test is the same across Canada. So one of the advantages when you pass your CFQ, your Certificate of Qualification, and you have your Red Seal, your training is recognized across the country. But the union sector has what's called pre-CFQ training. So they will prep you and sort of give you help on writing that exam. So that is also another big exam, which is pre-CFQ training, so that when you do write the exam, you're not going to be caught off guard, no surprises. So let's say you write that exam, you pass it, you're now a journey person. That's not the end of your career. So many people, they just, hey, I just want to be an electrician and I'm happy. I don't want to be the boss. I don't want to have my own company. Perfect. Great. No problem. But let's say for the sake of argument, hey, you know what? After 5 years, hey, I might want to be a supervisor or a foreman. Well, there's also training involved in that. And there's also, again, the union will provide you training in that regard, and they'll prepare you to be a supervisor or a foreman. And let's just say, hey, I really like this. I think I want to be my own boss, etc. Well, guess what? George Brown and 2 other colleges will recognize your CFQ as 2 years towards a 4-year business degree in construction management. So you can go to school part-time and in 2 years get a 4-year degree. And so you will also learn pricing and estimating, etc. So you can also start your own business. So by the time you're 30 years old, you could have your CFQ, number of years as a supervisor foreman, and then 2 years later you can have your degree, and 30 years old you can be your own boss and you can hire staff. Now that's a career path that's very, very difficult to do if you're not in the unionized sector. Because of all the supports on each step of the way, there's people there with experience and knowledge who can help you. And you may not know this when you're a pre-apprentice, and when you open that door into the construction world, you have no clue that, I can get a degree at the end of this journey. But it's one step at a time, and you open the door to another room, you open the door to another room, and you open the door to another room, and then it's like, holy mackerel. I can have a university degree. When I started off, I dropped out of high school. And now I have a degree and I have my own business.
Rob, tell us about the bidding processes when companies or municipalities or governments put out a bid or a tender. What's the benefit of having it being with, like, say, unionized labor? And what are some of the myths?
Yeah, some of the myths are that, I'll give you an example. The City of Toronto is signatory to, I believe, 14 different unions, and they only have union contractors do their work. Now, there's a myth going out there that it's 15 or 25% more expensive to taxpayers. That is absolutely not substantiated by any research whatsoever. And a few years ago, the City of Toronto managers were asked to estimate how much potential savings there could be if they just opened the bidding up to union and non-union. They came up at 1.7%, which is statistically insignificant. It's really, there's no difference. It's a myth based on some, I'm going to say this word, fake news. Yeah. It's not anything that was peer-reviewed or vetted by any organization. It started off with this Texas Road Building Association. We're trying to come up with equations with number of bidders. The union construction sector is very competitive. There's over 7,000 contractors that are signatory. So the myth that all of a sudden, if the City of Toronto were to open it up to union and non-union and the prices would drop, is a myth. It is so competitive right now. There's 7,000 union contractors. They're not in cahoots with each other, not sitting in a room price fixing. Mm-hmm. They're trying to undercut their union competitor. Yeah. So the prices now are like very, very, very competitive. Trust me, if you ask them, they'll tell you. So what happens, the bidding process is that a project gets put up for tender, whether private or public sector. Yeah. You'll have someone on your staff who's an expert in pricing and estimating. So they're going to take it's called a quantity takeoff. How many bricks? How many square meters of paint? How many meters of plumbing? Depending on their trade. So they will come up with an estimate, or sometimes it's provided, what the materials are, how many cubic meters of concrete, etc. So you have the actual materials. Then you know how much it takes man-hour wise to do a certain task. There's also books that are updated every year where they've gone down to different regions where there's so much per man-hours per square meter of painting or drywalling or whatever. There's books that you can purchase that give you the averages, that compiled all this. You may be faster because you've got guys who are way more productive. But anyway, you have to do the estimate, how many man-hours are going to take to do this much work. And then you have your profit margin. And so those three components make up your bid price. And generally speaking, it's the lowest bid wins. Union or non-union. City of Toronto, it's union only. And the lowest bid wins the job. And so it's very competitive. There's a lot of other factors in the play. It's not just that simple. So for the sake of argument, let's say you've got your year mapped out and you've got like a 2-month gap where you're not very busy, and you may want to consider laying your people off. But if they're key employees and you lay them off, some other contractor may scoop them up, and then when you're busy again, you may lose them. So you may bid on a project and not have any profit margin. You just want to pay everyone's wages, pay because you don't want to lose those people. So it's not as cut and dry as you think. It's not just, I have to have a profit margin. Sometimes I want to keep my men busy for those 2 months because I don't want to lay them off and lose them. So even if I don't make any money, as long as I break even, I'll bid on that work and bid a low price. So there's a lot of play, and there's economic times, there's interest rates, it can be a complicated thing. I mean, the simplistic way is, like I just said, materials, labor, profit margin. But then what are the market conditions? What's happening and what time of year is it? So there's a lot of different factors involved.
So Rob, is it safe to say that using unionized workforce has benefits to society? Tell me about that. Like what are some of the things we've talked about? Safer workers, higher wages, living standards that are much better. Tell us about this.
The impact of a career. These are not jobs. These are careers. I mean, these are absolute careers. With an exam, like it's the same as going to university or college. These are careers that it takes 4 or 5 years to get to. Once you get your CFQ and you're a journey person, you're making the maximum level in a collective agreement. You're now in part of the middle class. You're getting health and welfare benefits, you're getting a pension, and you're getting paid a fair price. You've invested all that time, just like going to university, you've invested all that time into a career, and then you're going to get a fair wage, and you are now in the middle class. So now you can afford to participate in the middle class. And, economists talk about multipliers, whereas, for example, if you invest $1 in infrastructure, the spin-off to society is $2 because there's all these different multipliers. And the same thing is now you have more disposable income. You can afford to buy that car. You can eat out a little more. You're supporting the local economy because you have more disposable income. You're now not forced to make a decision like, do I pay my rent or do I buy my kids new clothes? You don't have to be in that position anymore. You can retire with dignity. When you retire, you've got a pension. You can go to Florida for 2 weeks. You're not going to be collecting social assistance when you're retired. You're also not going to be collecting welfare and EI when you're working because you will be employed. You'll be gainfully employed. So then you can afford, I was going to say to buy a house. It's still in Toronto. It's like even an MBA can't buy a house right now. But so. You know what I mean in terms of rental, or you can save. You'll be at the point where at least you can start saving. Maybe you can buy a condo to start off. But you're in the middle class now. You've got a career that's equivalent to an arts degree in a university or some kind of college degree. So you are now in the middle class, and you can afford to do things for your family that you may not have been before. So this spin-off is crime rates are reduced. There's a lot of the cycle of poverty gets reduced, where a child sees his mother or father going to work every day and coming back and is proud of what they do. They've got a recognized credentials in their career. It changes the whole scenery of the whole environment of neighborhoods.
And Rob, we know that with all your experience, you've seen the benefits of young people going into the skilled trades. But what I'm reminded of is actually one of your sons who actually changed careers to go into the trades. If you don't mind, could you share a little bit about that?
Well, my youngest son, he, like many young people, and I think there's too many choices nowadays. He went to university. He took a general arts program. He took philosophy and psychology, which he initially thought he wanted to be a lawyer. He wasn't sure, and philosophy is like one of the kids who take philosophy tend to go into law school. He then, I have a few friends who are lawyers. I took him out for lunch, let him pick their brains. Then he said, oh, you know what? I think I want to be a paralegal. So he looked at that No, don't want to be that. I don't think I want to be a paralegal. Then he's very much interested in politics and setting policy. And so I had an associate who worked for the Ministry of Labor. We went for lunch. We talked about all that, and this is as he's in university. This is through his 4 years at school, and no, I don't want to go in public policy. Then he had gone to a school where they did have shops, so he took robotics and he took electronics as a course, one of his elective courses, and he loved it, and he got A's, and he said, "Dad, I think I want to be an electrician," and I said, "Okay." But I was a bit hesitant on, at that time I was with the OCS, and we actually had the head of the IBW union on my board, as well as the high-ranking person with the Contractors Association. So I could have easily pulled some strings, because it's very difficult to be an apprentice with IBW. But
IBW is?
The International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. Yeah, sorry for the acronyms again. I hesitated because he had switched so many times, and I didn't want to use my supposed influence on getting him in, and then 6 months later he said, "Oh, it's not for me." So I didn't do anything. He went through this is during the pandemic, it's a 6-stage process. Interviews, they have to write essays, they had a lot of different steps, they have to write an aptitude test. He went through all this a whole year, got to the last stage, and they said, "No, we're not going to take you, but we think you should try again."
Whoa.
So personally, I think they did that because he had his degree, and they were not sure if he was serious about it. So he went through the whole process again, and he got in. And I later told my 2 associates, I said, "I didn't talk to you guys, but my son's now an apprentice with them." And they said, "Oh, thank you for not asking us about this." He got in legitimately, and he's been an apprentice for 2 years now. He loves it. He actually loves it. He's working downtown. He's working on, right now, the scope of work he's working on now is fire alarm systems. So he's right downtown in the financial district, and he loves it. He loves it. And he sees all these different, I call them scopes of work. There's so many different scopes of work in that trade as there are with other trades. And he's just looking forward to getting experience in other trades, and he really enjoys it.
Great. Rob, so far we've spoken about men, but you know this industry in and out. How much room is there for women?
There's a lot of support programs in place. The Provincial Building Trades has a whole program. It's a lot of women are being very successful. And yes, it can be, it's prominently male, like it's approximately 90% male, but there's been a lot of women succeeding and being moved up to being supervisors. There's a lot of room for women, and there's a lot of shortages in different trades, and so there's room, and there's like over 30 different trades. So people tend to look at what they see. So they see workers on roads, they see workers in foundations, but they don't see, once the walls are up in the building, there's so many different options. So women and men, I go, hey, have a look. There's so much difference between a painter and a plumber and an electrician and a carpenter and insulator and a glazier, and there's so many, maybe you like working inside, maybe you like working outside, maybe you like a mix of the both, maybe you don't want to get dirty, maybe you don't care if you get dirty. There's all these different options, and so most people know 6 or 7 trades. They know painter, electrician, carpenter. They don't know what an electrician does. They don't know what a millwright does. They don't know what a boilermaker does. And I'm not going to explain what they do, but I'm saying you don't know what you don't know. You need to investigate what the different options are, because based on your disposition and what your talents are, there's probably a trade for you that you are going to flourish in, and that's male or female. I recommend that both do that, because there's so many options out there, and there's more and more women entering the trade. There's more and more support networks for women, and things are changing. They're changing.
And if somebody wanted a one-stop shop to learn more about the trades, Skills Trades Ontario?
There is a website that I do recommend. It has sort of a snapshot of each trade. It has some pictures and some videos of apprentices being interviewed. It's I was going to spell that out first. It's ctaontario.ca. So CTAO. It stands for Construction Training and Apprenticeship Ontario. .ca. So ctaontario.ca, and that'll give you a good idea of what the different options are, as well as, you know, what does a typical person do, what is a day in the life of, some videos of interviews and some pictures of what tools they typically use, job sites, those kinds of things.
Rob, you know what? This has been an enlightening time here. You've given us so much information, the facts, the myths, just everything. I want to thank you for this. This helps a lot.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rob. I was just going to ask you one more question, Rob. Who's going to win the Super Bowl?
Oh,
I know you played extensively.
Yes.
well, that would be the Grey Cup. That would be the Grey Cup. The Argos are going to win the Grey Cup. Kansas City are going to win the Super Bowl.
Oh, Kansas City. All right.